I'm so good I feel guilty. Almost.
Oh, that's awesome.
So before we got on the air, I asked where you getting into, and you told me what you're getting into. You say you're in the middle of Wyoming, but I want to ask you about, your humble beginnings. I understand you grew up in Detroit, Michigan. So I want to know, how does a guy from Detroit, Michigan makes his way through the ranks of WCW, WWE, at one point TNA, and now you live a life in Wyoming, man? What was life growing up for you? And did you envision yourself ever being in the industry?
No, I never imagined or aspired or fantasized even about being in the industry. I grew up as a wrestling fan. I grew up watching wrestling as a young kid in Detroit. I used to watch big time wrestling at TKLW out of Windsor, Canada. And, growing up as a kid, we lived in let's say a less than influential part of town, in Detroit back in the 50s and the 60s when I grew up there. Everything was the automotive industry, man. Every family worked either for Ford, Chrysler, General Motors. That's what everybody did. And everybody came from around the country to get those jobs because they were great paying jobs back in the day. So the entire, neighborhood that I lived in was people from all over the different parts of the country. It was a very diverse, neighborhood. You had, one block was the Polish families. The other block was, the African-American families. The other block was people that came from the South. They all kind of like found their own little niches of the neighborhood. And the result was, as a kid growing up, I was surrounded by culture. I was surrounded, like my friends. It was especially cool in the summertime because there was a big Italian section too of our neighborhood. And when I say Italian section, I mean people that came over and didn't speak English, Italian section, and Polish and German and everything else. So you'd go, in the late summer and early fall, everybody had a garden. The Italian families especially, they were really well organized. Like one family would raise chickens. And believe me, the lots, that we all lived on, these were inner city lots, right? They were like 1/8 of an acre, fairly big enough to park 4 cars on. But everybody had a garden. One family would grow tomatoes, the other family would grow zucchinis, the people down the street would raise chickens, people down the street from them would have 3 or 4 goats. Even though it was like in the city, it was cool. And in the summer, late summer, early fall, a lot of people would harvest the stuff that they grew. And then each of these families would have cookouts in the summertime. And everybody, in the neighborhood would kind of, go from one place to the next place to the next place. So I had a blast growing up as a kid. It was just different, and I look back at it very fondly, and I'm grateful for it because it gave me a kind of a different worldview as a result. But I grew up, my parents, my father worked. We only had one car. My mother would drive my dad to work on Saturdays because he works 6 days a week. And then my mom would take the car and she'd go grocery shopping, right, once a week. That left my younger brother and I home alone. Like we had control of the house. There was only one television and we had complete control of it, on Saturday mornings. So we'd start out watching, silly ass cartoons, Bugs Bunny and Roadrunner and Felix the Cat and all that happy horse shit. And then about 11 o'clock in the morning after the cartoons were over, as you got later in the morning, then wrestling came on. And that was like the big part of our Saturday mornings was watching wrestling. So I grew up as a fan, but I never, ever thought in my wildest dreams, even until the day I got a job in wrestling, I never thought I'd be in the wrestling business. So it kind of just happened.
That's awesome. Go ahead, man.
No, it's you. Go ahead.
Okay. So, okay, growing up in different cultures, growing up in a way that most people probably don't. Well, not most, but some don't. What was the inspiration for you to want to get into business? Was there something that you saw in entertainment or marketing that you said, "Man, this is something that I could do. This is the thing that I can put my hand on." What was that spark for you?
There really wasn't one when it came to being interested in the entertainment business. I was a consumer like everybody else, and I loved wrestling. I loved other forms of entertainment, like every kid does. Every person growing up, is affected in one way, shape, or form by music or television or movies or whatever it may be. Some people books. It doesn't matter. We're all affected by media in one way, shape, or form.
Right.
But I never thought I would be in it. Now, I think one of the reasons that I was probably drawn to the entertainment business is because I grew up as an entrepreneur. I didn't aspire to be an entrepreneur. I didn't think about the fact that I was. But, going back to my childhood, there was an Italian family, a couple. I don't know if they have any kids, or if they had any kids or not, but they owned a little. It's still there, by the way. The store is still there. It's on Curtis Road, and I can't remember the cross street, but it's right in East Point or Roseville, where I grew up. And it was called Lucy's. That was the wife's name. They named the little store after Lucy. And they sold beer and soft drinks and convenience foods, and they had model cars for sale. I mean, it had a little bit of everything there, right? And I would go over there like when I was like 6 or 7 years old, and they gave me a job. And my job was to go out and pick up all the trash, all the litter, the candy wrappers, bottle caps, whatever was laying around. My job was to clean up the front of the store every day. And then once I was done, they would come out and they would check it. And if it looks like I did a good job, they would bring me in. And my pay for that day was I was able to reach into the cash register with one hand, not two, just one hand. And whatever coins I could grab with one attempt was my pay for the day.